There's a bullfrog competing with me. My name is Dani Baker. I'm the author of The Home-Scale Forest Garden, How to Plan, Plant, and Tend a Resilient Edible Landscape. And I'm sitting here in my enchanted edible forest. It's an intentional planting of food plants modeled after a forest edge. Today we're going to walk around the garden and look at many features that make it so special. So here we are in the vegetable garden, and I want to show you a few ways that nature has just moved in and provided some services. So this is an example. This is purslane. I didn't plant it. It's edible. It forms a great ground cover, and it just germinated by itself here under my squash, and I'm just going to let it be. We mulch with leaf litter. Our neighbors are kind enough to drop off their leaves, which they consider to be a problem, but we consider to be a treasure. And we line the aisles with leaf litter, which keeps the moisture in, keeps the weeds down, and also keeps our shoes from getting muddy after a rain. Here are a couple more examples of how nature is just doing her thing. This is dill that's self-seeded. I planted it maybe 10 years ago. Every year it self-seeds a little bit. Not only is it an herb that we can use, but when it flowers, it attracts beneficial insects, particularly the parasitic wasps that feed on the nectar in the flower. And then when they're ready to lay their eggs, they lay them on soft-shelled, soft-skinned pests like potato beetles. So it's really an asset to let it just volunteer. And here's another example. This is hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is not native, but it's naturalized. It's a vining legume. And when I see it growing in my garden, I leave it because it converts nitrogen in the air to a form that plants can use. It's a nitrogen fixer. And also, I've noticed that it's a trap crop for aphids. Aphids when they're around, tend to congregate on the vetch and leave all of my vegetables alone. We're still in the vegetable garden. To my left are onions that I keep covered so the leek moth can't get them. Right here is kale, which I keep covered so that white moth that lays eggs and hatches green worms won't get them. And then over there is chard. And what I'm holding is milkweed. So I didn't plant this, nature did. I let it grow. Not only is every part of the plant edible for people, but the flowers attract butterflies, and they're the only food of the monarch. So I let it grow in the garden. It doesn't hurt anything, and it's beautiful. It smells lovely. This is a southeast facing fence where I have my grapevines trellised on top of the fence. And I want you to notice there's all kinds of stuff growing here. Most vineyards have either bare ground or sod, but here we have all kinds of herbaceous plants growing. And do the grapes look unhappy? I don't think so. In nature, grapevines will grow up amidst all kinds of other plants. Trees, bushes, herbaceous, and they seek the height and the sun. I want to point this out. These are perennial sweet peas. They have lovely flowers that attract beneficials. They fix nitrogen. They're a legume. And when they start to impinge on the grapes, if they're starting to shade them a little too much, I just rip them down. They'll grow back. They're perennial. And sometimes I bring them over and feed them to the goats. I want to talk about this now. This is an elderberry bush that was planted by a bird. They must have been perching on the fence and did a little poop, and then the seed germinated, and here it is. I chose not to try to eliminate it because not only is it beautiful and does it provide edible food for me, but it's also a trap crop for birds. Birds tend to prefer the elderberry berries to grapes. So if I have berries ripening here while my grapes are ripening, the birds will leave my grapes alone, and I won't have to net them. This looks like a mishmash, but it's really, everything's happy here. There are a number of perennial plants here, some edible and some to support the edibles. So this is blue lupin. Let's see, these are the seed pods, and I believe back there we have a blooming one. This fixes nitrogen, also provides ground cover, is a lovely cut flower, and is also a trap crop for aphids. I've noticed aphids congregating on the top stem, when it's still green. These are perennial onions. This is a perennial plant called Good King Henry that's like spinach. And what I want you to notice is that there's all kinds of plants growing together and everything looks happy. Now, in a vegetable garden, do you think the spinach would be this happy if it was surrounded by, quote, weeds? But the perennials are so resilient and vibrant that they can just grow amidst others, and they're very happy. It's great to have a water feature of any size in a garden. It provides water for all of your creatures, including birds. It attracts dragonflies that eat mosquitoes, and the amphibians love it. So here we have a bunch of frogs sitting on this algae mat. Now, the modern American eye probably looks at this pond and thinks it's polluted. But if it was polluted, the frogs would not be here, believe me. It's not polluted. It's a very shallow, warm pond, and this is what naturally happens in a pond under those circumstances. The frogs love it. They're camouflaged on top of the mat, so predators can't find them. And when they see a bug go by, they hop on the mat to catch it. This is a mulberry tree. The mulberries are ripe, and the best way to harvest them is just by whacking a branch and letting them fall on a tarp. Let's see how that works. Woo! It's raining mulberries. Now, planting a mulberry tree, you don't want to put it near a walkway because it's pretty messy when they naturally drop to the ground. But I've noticed this tree is also a trap crop for birds. My raspberries are ripe just over there, and the birds prefer the mulberries, so they haven't been touching my raspberries at all. This is called an edible forest because we're using all the vertical space. We want to collect all the solar radiation we can. Also, the more foliage you have, the more shade you have, which also holds moisture in the ground. When the leaves fall, you have more natural mulch, and you're collecting dew. So even in a drought time, at night it gets cool, the dew settles on any leaves. The taller the trees, the more leaves, the more dew settles, and eventually is absorbed by the leaves, but also falls to the ground and keeps everything nice and moist. We also have bushes and herbaceous plants and ground cover. So all of those layers are part of the forest garden. This is a Siberian pea shrub. It fulfills the shrub layer of the garden. It's a legume. It fixes nitrogen. It's also very attractive in the spring, covered with yellow flowers that are edible. These peas are edible as well, but they're awfully tiny. They make great forage, though, for chickens because they're very high in protein. In addition to over 25 different nitrogen-fixing plants that I've incorporated in the garden, I've also incorporated plants that are referred to as nutrient accumulators. These plants have really deep taproots that get down to the subsoil, where a lot of fruit tree and berry bush roots can't reach. This is an example. This is Russian comfrey. It has a really deep taproot. It pulls up 6 different nutrients. The flowers are very attractive to pollinators and even hummingbirds. The leaves and stems accumulate 6 different nutrients that are important to plants, and you can chop and drop this. This plant produces so much organic matter. This is the first flush. These stems will fall to the ground. They decay extremely rapidly, or you can chop and drop them wherever you feel a plant needs a little extra boost. And then it'll grow a whole nother crop of this amount of foliage from the center. 3 or 4 times a season if it has sufficient moisture. This is my raspberry patch. You'll notice that it's under an apricot tree and there's a young Asian pear growing out of it. The reason I want to talk about this is you can create a lot of income streams in a garden like this. We have U-Pick by appointment. So people come and pick the raspberries. They only get a pint or 2, but it's for the experience. It's a lot more lucrative for someone to pick these and pay me to pick them than for me to pick them and then try to sell them. This is a pretty boggy area. Can you hear the squish, squish, squish? Yeah. And I wanted to create some growing space in a woods with basically a water table that's above the surface for a good part of the year. So I built some Hugo culture mounds. A Hugo culture mound starts with a wood base, logs put very close together, or branches, doesn't matter. You want to fill in the gaps though, because you don't want to make a nice habitat for mice to come in and eat your roots from underneath. So you pack them in tight, and then you cover them with any kind of organic matter that you happen to have at hand. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's nice to mix a little green in with the brown. Pile it up really high because it's going to condense as it decays. And then leave it for, I usually build them in the late fall and leave them for the winter. And by spring, I'm ready to plant. Perennial plants are very resilient, and their roots will find sustenance even if it's only a partially decayed mound at the time. Plant it with all kinds of perennial edibles. So we have daylilies, we have some currant bushes, we have hosta, which is edible when it first shoots up in the spring. And these are all plants that love the shade. It's pretty shady in the middle of the woods here. There are many advantages to Hugo culture mounds. One of them being it raises your growing area above whatever it is underneath. So in this case, above water and the root competition from the trees. You can also plant them if you have really rocky soil or very shallow soil. You can build one of these and you have a great fertile area to grow your bushes and even trees on. I do some mowing in my garden to give good access to all of the beds, but in between I don't mow. I let all the plants grow and produce flowers to feed the pollinators, and also I leave them over the winter because a lot of the herbaceous plants are habitat for overwintering beneficial insects. I'll mow it only once a year in the mid-spring when things start greening up, just to get rid of all this woody stuff. In addition to nitrogen-fixing plants and dynamic accumulators or nutrient accumulators, we incorporate a lot of herb plants in the garden. This is lavender, I have sage, I have oregano, I have a number of other herbs. The herbs not only attract beneficial insects when they're blooming, and of course are wonderful for flavoring and for medicinal applications for people, but they often contain oils that have antifungal qualities. And when those oils sublimate or evaporate into the air, they may actually protect some of the trees and the bushes from fungal disease. Another principle of this kind of gardening, and one of my favorites, is reducing human labor going forward. Whenever you can do something that saves you work, that's a plus. So this is an Asian pear tree, and this is a blackberry vine or cane that's being trellised on the Asian pear. I planted these on purpose on the south side of the trees so that I'd have a ready-made trellis and I wouldn't have to build one. Another principle that's incorporated in this garden is diversity. I've incorporated over 300 different plants here, most of them producing a food crop. The food crops start early in April and extend right through November. So in terms of income streams, there's a possibility to have income coming into the farm from the harvest of this garden for the entire growing season. Diversity is beneficial for all of the plants. If I had just apple trees, it would be a feast for the pests of apples. But in this garden, I have a plum tree, then I have a berry bush, then I have a cherry tree, then an apple tree, then pear over there, a nitrogen-fixing tree there, persimmon. So there's so much diversity that a pest isn't going to have a feast. It's going to have to work to find its host. Another aspect of diversity is as the climate warms and changes, the more different plants you have in your garden or farm, the more likely it is that something is going to produce a good harvest. In the context of climate change, diversity makes it much more likely that some of your plants are going to survive no matter what the climate chooses to do, and also it also ensures that you're going to have some harvest. Even though some plants may not be thriving, others will be very productive. These big leaf plants are elecampane. They just decided to move into my garden in an area where I don't have any particular plantings of my own, and I'm very happy to have them. They have deep taproot, so they're pulling up a lot of nutrients. They have many medicinal applications, producing a huge amount of organic matter, which when it dies down in the fall just enriches the soil. They have flowers soon that attract butterflies. And they're very prominent, they're very attractive. So why try to get rid of them? Nature decided to put them here, and I welcome them. I hope this tour of my garden inspired you to bring Mother Nature into your property. Please check out my website, enchantededibleforest.com, for more information.